When Caracas was being settled, Apollo had spread out rings of signal buoys in orbit around the planet. Thousands of these buoys were tracked by the new Federation navigation, and were left alone unless they posed danger to orbital traffic. Several thousands years after humanity settled Caracas, one of the signal buoys was pinged by a signal that didn't originate from Caracas or any of its colonies. The buoy then tight-beamed the signal downward, boosting it without much data loss, and targeted old communication towers on the surface of Caracas that were built during the early day of Caracas civilization, right when a skeleton crew was working to mothball the structure. It took them a week to realize that a simple binary signal was being beamed in, and after translating it into Caracan, this was the message. The Caracan sent back their message, attached with a portfolio of images, texts, music, and other cultural artifacts of Caracas and its colonies. Years moved on without reply, due to the sheer distance between two worlds. An entire generation was born awaiting the message, and speculation was building among the public on how the Union, or Cradle, would respond. Eventually, they did. With this exchange of messages, Caracas has entered a new era of interstellar politics. Cradle, or Earth, a world long forgotten by the people of Caracas, was now the center of attention as data from the messages confirmed that the messages sent by Union originated from there. More messages moved back and forth, and gradually returned faster as their origin point, a Union near lighter, was en route to Caracas. The first contact was imminent. When the Union near lighter has arrived in system, it was greeted by an honor guard consisting of both military and civilian vessels, escorting it to Caracas. Between the approaching Union near lighter and Caracas, diplomatic handshakes were established and a more detailed exchange of information was conducted. The new Federation learned more about the history of Union, and were able to place themselves in a coherent timeline, by integrating into Union's standard timeline. This was, seen by modern baronies, as a mistake. By placing itself in Union's standard timeline, the new Federation has switched the center of galactic control from Caracas to Union. Arguably, this negatively affected the independence of Caracas as a whole. In fact, they felt that Caracas should demand Union to integrate into Caracan's standard timeline instead, as Caracas has existed prior to the fall and lasted to this very day. And their sentiments weren't alone nor new. While the new Federation handled the first contact fairly well, and the first few centuries of interaction between the two galactic entities were peaceful, the new Federation was unable to address the ever-expanding political influence of Union on the galactic zone, far faster than the new Federation could ever achieve. On Caracas, resistance to the administrative and cultural reforms by the new Federation began to form, spurred by disillusioned hagiographs, careerists of the new Fed army, that were angered by the new Federation's passiveness against Union's attack on Caracan culture. On Cradle, a growing anthro-chauvinist movement reacted negatively to the idea that those live on the periphery of Union's territory could ever threaten the Union's mantle. And when they successfully called a vote of no confidence on the First Committee of Union to install the Second Committee of Union, the relationship between Caracas and Cradle worsened. The uneasy peace was no longer sustainable, and soon, both sides will crash head-on. In the short span of a few centuries, peaceful diplomatic relationship between the new Federation and Union has completely collapsed. SECOM wants to stop Union from being complacent in managing other galactic states, while the new Anorum party that has taken majority control of the new Federation wanted the center of galactic power to move back from Cradle to Caracas. The tension boiled until it snapped when UNS Pilgrim, a diplomatic vessel intended to tour Caracas with a small party of Union officials on board, was destroyed by militant hagiographers, which at this time, the military rank of hagiograph was no longer in use, but was instead adopted by a zealous supporter of the new Anorum movement. The hagiographers were declared as heroes, for destroying Union near lighters that were previously thought to be untouchable for being far more advanced than ones used by Caracans. But with the destruction of the Pilgrim, the Second Committee has decided to address fire with fire, by raising a fleet that can cripple Caracan's shipyard. The journey to Caracas would take years, and the new Federation knew this, slowly bolstering a fleet that could withstand the Union's assault. The hagiographs continued to whip the population into a full generation of fervor, not just on Caracas, but also Arudine and the nearby Ispasalar. Years passed, and the Union fleet finally reached Caracas system. At 10 terameters, 33,356 light seconds, 66.85 astronomical units, the battle began between Union and Karakin fleets. Missiles, tens of meters long, and mid-confidence predictive kinetics were exchanged between the two fleets, but both fleets held their main batteries in reserve, as Union fleet was still a month away from Karakin itself, far outside of the effective range. Subline ships and flyers crossed the no-man's land, intercepting the missiles days before reaching their target. Small engagement occurred as the interdiction squadrons met one another, engaging even when they couldn't see their enemies. Waypoints on their HUD were the only proof the threat was real. Capital ships continued to exchange salvos day after day, the unpredictability gap closing in. It was clear to both sides that the Karakin has the advantage in this fight. The Karakin fleet was more organized, more numerous, better equipped, well rested, and has the home field advantage. The problem was that they have not one, but two enormous, planet-sized, home field disadvantages. With the black void behind them, capital ships of the Union fleet unloaded their long spool guns, kinetic slugs accelerated to near light speed, gigaton worth of energy accumulated in each of those rounds. At the range they fired, any Karakin ships could easily dodge the relativistic attack by adjusting their course, but the Union fleet wasn't targeting their ships, they're targeting their homes. With a high chance that at least one of the projectile will strike home, the new Fed fleet masters have split up their fleet to intercept the projectiles. However, this exposed them to the Union fleet as Union closed the gap and engaged the Karakin fleet. While Karakin fleet was more numerous, the act of splitting up the fleet allowed Union fleet to outnumber each isolated group and smash them apart. On top of that, the Karakin had to scuttle their capital ships into the path of the kinetics, stranding subline vessels in disorganized fashion, and had their communication jammed by Union tech. To simply put, Karakin fleet was too disorganized to mount any sort of defense against the Union fleet's attack. However, the effort of New Federation fleet wasn't completely in vain. At great cost, most of the projectiles were intercepted, preventing a massacre on an unknown scale. One, however, slipped through and impacted Karakin. Delamar was a city with a population of 20 million souls at the time. A few miles off the coast of the city, the projectile impacted the sea. Even when most of the energy was dispersed by sheer mass of the ocean, the resulting earthquake and tidal waves still devastated the city, killing hundreds of thousands of people as its immediate effect. Weeks later, after annihilating and capturing most if not all of the main Karakin fleet, Union fleet reached the orbit of Karakin. Subline corvettes, mothballed capital ships, and converted civilian yachts and shuttles fought one last desperate battle, but the result was plain as day. Karakin, with its fleet gone and a hole torn on its surface, surrendered. But the invasion never happened. The Union fleet burned away towards Cradle as soon as they reached Karakin, leaving the new Federation wondering what had happened. However, to the Karakins, the Union retreat didn't feel like a victory. Delamar was still devastated, the dead littered the street, and damage control teams scrambled to save what's left of it. The houses, angered by the complete inability of the new Federation to repel Union's assault, called for a vote of no confidence at the new Federation government. The new Federation government stepped down, and in turn, was replaced by the Federated Baronic State of Karakin and her colonies, or less formally, the Karakin baronies. The barons' first act was to rebuild throne Karakin and the Baronic fleet. A rallying cry was chosen to urge its people to enlist. Union must be destroyed. Unfortunately, that kind of fell flat on its own, because when the Union fleet returned years later, there wasn't a second Union Baronic War, because it was too one-sided to be even called one. When the Union fleet came back years later, they came back stronger with new technology. Non-human person, NHP, not only allowed each vessel to be even more heavily automated than machine mind-equipped ship, but also caused the machine minds of the baronies to completely malfunction in the face of paracausal attack. Despite all the efforts the baronies put into beating the war drum, they were paper tigers. As if that wasn't bad enough, Karakin was unfortunately still focusing on rebuilding its city. The first of their capital ships were still skeletal structures anchored to orbital shipyards by the time Union fleet arrived in system. Karakin surrendered, again, but the baronies didn't really lose either. Union agreed to aid the baronies in expanding their infrastructure, in exchange for the baronies to stop building their fleet. The barons will also remain as the head of their houses and states, as long as Union receives a steady supply of material from them. While war made the barons appear powerful, it was a costly affair and far less profitable than peace and trade. With the peace treaty, they and their descendants will remain in power, Union will foot the bill for the destruction they have caused, and Karakan baronies as a whole has the monopoly on Union's raw material supply. So, the barons signed the agreement, and both sides came out of this conflict alive and richer. The barons have decided, they will not rule the universe. If the Union wanted it so badly, they can have it. After all, if the self-styled master of the galaxy tried to claim their worlds by force, surely it must be the true prize of the universe. The Union can wear the crown however they want, let them deal with the tragedies and implications that will come with it. The barons will own and enrich the only land that mattered, Karakis, and all her colonies. Thus, the Karakan Trade Baronies was formed. Hello there, if you like this video, please subscribe to my channel and click that notification bell button. If you really want to support my channel, you could visit my Patreon page, or buy me some coffee, links in the description. Anyway, have a nice day.